Salam, hello, bonjour. This is Adnan Hussein, historian of the medieval Mediterranean and Islamic world, or Islamicate world history at Queen's University. Welcome everyone to the show. It's a very important topic we have today. There have been many momentous events taking place, not the least of which, of course, have been the continuing genocide in Gaza, but something that has managed to push even that and some of the changes that were starting to take place in the international or geopolitical situation regarding relations to Israel and pressure that was starting to be brought to bear on Israel. One, major event has pushed that off of the front pages, which is Israel's attack, that is in some quarters being characterized very fallaciously as a preemptive strike, but it's aggressive violation of all the norms of international law with a major attack upon Iran just a few days ago at time of recording. And since then, there's also been subsequent response. And so we're here recording on Sunday night. This may come out in a couple of days, but Sunday night, just 72 hours after the strikes started. And I have a couple of guests on to talk about this and to provide their insight. They're both well known to you, one of whom is Sina Rahmani, my producer, and also host of East as a podcast. So everybody on this channel knows Cena very well. But you also will be familiar with my other guest because he was one of the first guests that I had on the program, Professor David Yaghoubian from California State, San Bernardino, who you will remember from an earlier episode where he did an amazing account of 19th to 20th to the 21st century history of Iran within a geopolitical context. Welcome to you both back on the Adnan Hussein Show.
Thank you.
Well, Dave, in particular, I know you've just returned actually from Iran. So you will have a very fresh sense of the situation immediately prior to these attacks during the period of these ongoing, interminable, so-called negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. There was a sixth round of discussions that had been scheduled for today in Qatar, which did not take place because Iran has said that during the conflict that it's facing against Israeli aggression, it doesn't make sense to be engaged in these sorts of negotiations. Maybe there's more to be said about its refusal. But that's what was the mood in the atmosphere beforehand, was a continuing process that was absolutely violated and destroyed, by Israel's strikes. And so I wanted to just get a sense from you when you were in Iran. How were these being regarded? What seemed to be discussions by people about the negotiations taking place? And then maybe we can talk a little bit more about what actually happened. But before these events, you were actually there on the ground. So what can you tell us about the situation in Iran prior to the strikes?
And again, thanks for having me, Adnan. Just a very important conversation that we're about to have. I'd like to just kind of describe how my trip to Iran, I was there from May 26th until June 7th, how that relates to what's going on now and basically the reason that I was there. And so I think this all will eventually be today in this discussion, we'll be talking about more of the details behind the last 2 months and the collusion, in my view, between the United States, Israel, European vassals of the United States in this entire charade over the last 2 months. But basically roughly 2 months ago, when President Donald Trump made the announcement that if Iran did not sign some sort of new nuclear agreement, that the bombing would begin in 2 months, I basically went on and bought my ticket to Tehran, expecting that either the bombs would start falling and I would be able to be there to give like firsthand reports. I contacted you, among others, to let you know that I would be there in case, the proverbial shit hit the fan. Obviously, I missed it by a week. That's, I guess, as my dad would have said, neither here nor there. But the point being, many of us, yourself included, of course, the blogosphere, were well aware of this threat that Donald Trump had put forward, and then in following subsequently the process of these so-called negotiations, or this process with Witkoff and the United States and the back and forth, as well, of course, what seemed to be to many of us a good cop, bad cop charade between Trump and Netanyahu, because at that time, 2 months ago, when he made this threat, this was also when the American mainstream media started talking about this dust-up between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, and that they weren't getting along. And so it seemed as though the narrative was being seeded, this sort of good cop, bad cop framework, and yet with the overt threat that and Donald Trump didn't say whether Israel was going to start bombing or the United States was going to start bombing, but that the bombs would start falling in 2 months. So that was the basis for my trip to Iran. Now, so of course, having been there in the week before this all unfolded, and directly to your question, I guess I could summarize by saying, and I had this conversation several times, including with my dear aunt there, who's in her late 80s, who has been she was a revolutionary. She continues to be, and so I value her opinion, and all of the others, of course, that I spoke with. And the basic take there at the time was there is going to be no successful negotiation, nor is there going to be a war between Israel and the United States, or between Israel and Iran, or between Israel and the United States and Iran, simply because of the conclusion of those that I spoke to, that Iran is simply too strong. This would be suicidal for the Zionists to unilaterally attack Iran, as well as suicidal for the declining American empire, considering its force configuration in the region, to attack Iran. So this was the basic take. I didn't speak to anyone, and this is really why I was there, to focus on this and to witness and observe this if it was going to go down, who was fearful of any sort of imminent attack. Really, the malaise of the sanctions over the years, and the fact that, honestly, when I show up in Iran, for many of these people, it's like the time for them to have this conversation again for the 10th year, for the 15th year in some cases, related to these issues. And so I'm not sure if that made sense, but it's basically like it was a rolling of the eyes, like, yeah, we're here again. We got maximum pressure sanctions. The United States and Israel are threatening us, and nothing's going to happen because nothing ever happens with this, and accepting that this was how things were just going to continue potentially into eternity. So yeah, there was no expectation, anticipation that we would be here now. And, several individuals who I spoke with thought it was even kind of strange that I timed my trip the way that I did. And they weren't aware of Donald Trump's threat 2 months ago to begin bombing in 2 months. Therefore, it just seemed kind of strange, but I'm considered to be a little bit strange by some of my friends and family in Iran. So they're less interested in foreign policy and geopolitics, and they just want to live their lives, right? So that I think sort of sums up what at least I could identify as if you will the pulse on the street, the zeitgeist. I will say also, I was only in basically central Tehran for most of this trip, because this was a work trip to basically work with Press TV or friends and colleagues. But the country never seemed, irrespective of the sanctions, more developed, more clean, more calm. This also has to do with the fact that the government is not enforcing the hijab regulations, and so at least half of the women in the streets are just wearing whatever they want. There is music, like live bands. The government used to try to curtail the busking and the live music on the street, and that's just gone now. So people are jamming in the street, they're singing in the street, they're standing and enjoying those displays and that music. And so there was absolutely no sense, at least in Tehran a week ago and for those 2 weeks, that anything imminent or threatening was happening. Of course, everyone continues to complain about the real dollar exchange rate, but that was sort of it up until I returned on June 7th.
Well, that's interesting on two fronts of what you mentioned there, Dave. I mean, one point is that it seems that maybe some estimates of Iran's strength, both internally and externally, may have been a bit exaggerated. This is a question that, I have in mind is, has there been a little bit of projection, both internally and externally, about how militarily prepared and well-armed Iran is? There was a similar, perhaps, overestimation of some components of Hezbollah's capabilities as well. So that's one question that I have, is if there was this prevailing sense that there wasn't a keenly felt sense of threat, because there's been bluster and rhetoric in the past, there's been maximum pressure sanctions, but there's also been this sense that, with some of the responses that Iran made to previous attacks on the embassy and the consulate in Damascus and the like, that there was a kind of significant response in terms of being able to demonstrate capability, even if it wasn't designed to do extreme damage. And perhaps there was a sort of sense that, well, we're able to deter. And that obviously wasn't the case in this episode. And the second thing is just whether or not there was some complacency in being caught off guard, partly because of that repeated pattern that you mentioned of threat, as part of negotiations, attempting to use the sense of threat in order to achieve agreements that would be more favorable to the West and the United States' priorities and disadvantage Iran. And so being very familiar with this sort of cycle may have played a role. Did it? I mean, I wonder, this is a question. Did it play a role? I mean, the negotiations in some sense seem to have been a ploy. You alluded to in your opening remarks that there was this good cop, bad cop kind of game being played, and it's come out that, of course, Donald Trump admitted to being very aware of this earlier, even while his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, was trying to downplay U.S. involvement in these attacks in order to deter a sense that there would be any legitimacy in striking U.S. personnel or bases and facilities in the region. So I'm just wondering about that, just as a follow-up, those two kinds of components, and then we should ask Cena if he has something on this.
I think that Iran's size, I'll remind viewers, Iran is larger than Ukraine. Iran's size, its strategic depth, the history of the Iran-Iraq war, in which up until really the war of the cities, which involved the exchange of ballistic missiles, Tehran and cities like Mashhad, cities like Bandar Abbas were essentially too far away to be involved. And so, honestly, I myself did not predict that there would be, at least immediately, attacks in Tehran if, and I will say, if they did not come from MEK or sleeper cells internally based on some sort of drone attack, which I at least myself, I was fully expecting, and that's not that I'm clairvoyant or a military specialist. Look at what has been going on in the U.S. proxy war with Ukraine against Russia, and what just happened with the Russian aviation bases and their bombers. And, this was yet another thing a few weeks ago when I was thinking, well, my God, if Iranian military leadership isn't seeing this and at least preparing for such an attack, then they don't know what they're doing. Knowing that they do know what they're doing, I expected that they would be prepared for such an initial attack, which would come from local sources, which would come from drones rather than from, F-35s or some sort of standoff munitions. In the first Israeli attack, which was claimed to be so uber successful, if you'll remember, they didn't even make it into Iranian airspace. We didn't even see any sort of footage or satellite imagery of the supposed damage that they had done. So I think all of this potentially fed into this understanding or this sense that, well, nothing's going to happen immediately. And if it does happen, then it's going to slowly grow in intensity until it ultimately potentially reaches, larger Iranian cities, well within Iran. So as well, to your, I think, really excellent question about the let's say claims of Iranian military strength versus the reality, as you were asking the question, I myself was thinking, well, who have we derived our understanding of that from? Is that from guys like Elijah Magnier and Saeed Mohammed Morandi, who do know what they're talking about, but who aren't military specialists? Or did that come from the mouths of the IRGC, Pastoran, the leader themselves? And as I was thinking, it's a little bit of both, certainly, isn't it? But I've seen online, statements that might or might not be attributable to the Iranian military saying we've got 20,000, we've got 200,000, we've got millions. We could do this for 100 days if we needed to at this intensity. As I was commenting on yesterday in the rolling coverage, we don't know, and actually it's probably a good thing that we don't know, because these are military secrets, and this is all part of the information war and the psyops, if you will. But certainly based on, let's say, a reputable source, Hassan Nasrallah, who claimed, the hundreds of thousands of Hezbollah missiles, and we saw the films of the underground missile cities, and that imagery and those claims did not seem to correspond to what we saw in the exchanges between Hezbollah and the apartheid state of Israel. Therefore, I think an excellent question, just how formidable is Iran's arsenal? I won't get too into the sort of tech geek area of this, but one needs to also think about the fact that you can't just say, well, there's 20,000 missiles. What missiles? Okay, Iran definitely has tens of thousands of missiles that could obliterate the littoral Gulf states, the family regimes and the glass palaces that line the Persian Gulf, because these are very close in, and Iran has had stockpiles of these types of rockets and missiles for decades. The question is, how many long-range missiles of what type does Iran possess? There are Imad missiles, there are Fatah missiles, there's the Qasem Soleimani, etc. I could go on and on. Khaybar Sheikhan, how many does Iran possess? This is critical. So it's not just how many missiles does Iran have, how many missiles does Iran possess of the different types that would be necessary to sustain volleys of mixed quantity and types to defeat the aerial defense system of the apartheid state of Israel and enable hits. So we've seen this, and this itself will be part of a short-term war of attrition. That is, attriting on the ground, in use air defense assets in real time. And then there is the broader long-term war of attrition between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the apartheid state of Israel, which is predicated on Iran's resources and its strategic depth and its size and its abilities, technological, industrial, within the country. And Israel's ability to provision everything that it needs to sustain itself in this war of attrition from without. Everything. I would guess there is a little bit of indigenous Israeli industrial production, but as we know, the vast majority comes from without. So we're looking at short-term war of attrition in terms of the ability for Iran to strike, to actually hit Israel with its missiles relative to Israel's available aerial defenses, and then a longer war of attrition that relates to Israel's ability to be resupplied by the United States and Europe, essentially, and Iran's ability to resupply itself. And we might get into this later, to accept shipments from Russia and China, which seem to be going on right now, if the reports on social media are correct. So I hope that answered the question, and I'd love to hear Sina's take on this. But one more thing that I just want to throw out there, because I'm sure I can hear some of my friends in Iran who I haven't yet spoken to telling me that, David, you don't understand. This was all part of the plan. We left those assets to be hit. This was bait for the Zionists. General Salami, he was a figurehead. He wanted to die as a martyr. He wanted to walk Soleimani's path. He did that successfully. This is what they will argue, that this was all part of the plan to get the Zionists to do this, the stupid Zionists, so that they would once and for all give Iran the legitimate rights to eliminate the apartheid state of Israel from the map. I don't actually buy that, and I would if it was just, General Salami and a few others maybe, and maybe a couple of sites that had been allowed to be taken out. But once the body count came in on nuclear scientists, on IRGC heads, on Hajjadeh, absolutely not. And if this ever does come to be demonstrated to be true, then this is just like mind-bending 8D chess, and I'm prepared to be schooled, but I doubt that. In fact, I just don't.
Well, I think we will want to come to talking about the damage done and really assessing how devastating, an attack initially it was. But I think, there is something to this, though, even if it's not part of some plan. It has certainly created conditions, and I tweeted about this, that, if there is a time in which Iran would be able to justify itself to the global South, forget about the West, but justify itself to the, those NPT, treaty conforming countries of the global South that are interested in disarmament, in having controls over dangerous weapons of mass destruction, and ensuring some kind of regime of peace in the world. This is the case where any country would be able to understand with sympathy Iran's need for self-defense when it's been aggressively attacked without provocation in such a ruthless and destructive manner by an aggressive expansionist state that's attempting to destroy all of the possible rival powers, in the region. So,
and I would just briefly, I would just add Russia and China to that list. We all know, or many of us, that Russia and China for decades sat on the fence related to the issues going on in Palestine, as well as the Iran nuclear issue. They were part of the international, if you will, non-proliferation regime that ultimately led Iran to sign the JCPOA. And so perhaps this was also, if again, whether planned or somehow, whether planned or not, necessary to bring about full support for Iran at this time. I wouldn't leave out Russia and China as other countries that perhaps needed to witness this themselves, or at least have this within their own explanatory capacity and narratives for why they're going to get involved in the way that they are.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to ask Sina, of course, also to perhaps respond to what you've been talking about, Dave, but also something that in correspondence, Sina, the day that this happened, I was, of course, feeling very concerned about Iran. You receive all of these reports about how devastating the strike has been, and a lot of that can be exaggeration as part of the psyops, but these are the reports you hear at the beginning. And I reached out and with a note of sympathy to you, Sina, thinking that, yes, of course, this must be a very disturbing kind of day and experience. And you wrote something a little strange that is a good starting point in a way for thinking about what's been going on.
I have no memory of this.
Well, you said you've been waiting for this day for decades, in a way.
Oh,
in a way,
that's not strange. It's true.
Well, it is true.
It's true.
But I mean, it might strike people as like strange. How could somebody be waiting? But it actually is reflective of.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually reflective of the tension of and the paralysis, you could say, under which Iran has been kept through this sanctions regime and through this geopolitical game of trying to hem it in. So anyway, I just wondered if maybe you might say something a little bit about that. And of course, if you have any other response or things you want to add to what Dave was talking about in the kind of precursors to the situation and how we got to where we are today.
Yeah, I'm, guys, obviously people who listen to my show, I draw from some, aquifer of mania to like do these episodes. But today I'm just like tired. So I'm going to try to be less manic the way I usually do in an episode where I just like draw, some like insane like connections that like right there on the spot, but usually because I think through problems. But the sense that I completely forgot that I had said that, but I've said it a few times now. I said it to a lot of people, but I was like, what are you talking about? I feel like I can't believe this is such a grad student thing to say. I'm never going to forgive myself, but I need to like reach for Hegel and like to go back to like my grad school, basically religion of like German philosophy and 19th century philosophy and dialectics and Marxism and how history moves forward. And because that's the only overlay that I have to like interpret these events, right? Because I don't like humans live in the world as individuals, at least in our area, whatever that means. And we experience the world like through these kind of like prisms of screens and through text, through sort of ideas and images, and now live images, which have like complicated things. And I've talked about all this stuff before. But the sum total of all this is pointing to this event. I know that sounds very I can never say this word, millenarian. It's such a Shia thing to say. Maybe we could talk about that. This is a joke. I'm going to keep running, but like this, that history unfolds across this timeline, and there are moments where you're confronted with what is essentially like the greatest evil to exist in our times. This monstrous evil state with no boundaries, no conscience, pure hate as like a kind of being of itself, as a state and as a sort of, political being, as an entity, as a culture or whatever. So like, that's what I've been trying to hold to. And that's what I meant is that like the structuring anxiety, I later have put it as like the structuring anxiety of my like geopolitical, like, worldview, for lack of a better word. Like this is it, that like eventually belligerents come to blows. And that's where, and in this case, it's terrifying because it's like the country, particularly terrifying for me, but it wouldn't be, obviously it is less terrifying. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe it wouldn't be. What does it matter? I mean, we could talk about that, but the fact that, like I'm getting updates from like people there and like, it's something that I haven't experienced in my lifetime, because I've never experienced Iran under a war. Now, what word they use? But yeah, okay, yeah. So this has been something that like I've thought about a lot, and it feels like that this 40-year-long, almost 45-year-long war with the U.S. empire, mediated through its tip of the spear, its like most vicious attack dog, proxy military base, forward operating military base, infused with this like Jewish supremacist, uber nationalist, ultra fascist, like murderous genocidal political state that like proudly announces itself as the antithesis of everything that are supposedly liberal democratic states for, but that doesn't trouble us. And in fact, like we give them more weapons. So this is one of those moments where the what metaphor can I reach for? I don't know, like when you rip the husk of a corn and you see into like the truth of, you know, the delicious sweet truth of corn that yeah, this world is dominated and not ruled by, but dominated by this vicious imperial beast called the United States, that one of its chief enemies and targets is this country called the Islamic Republic of Iran, that over the course of its existence from 1979 onward, that it's faced various U.S. wars, unceasing U.S. wars that have unfolded through different phases, that unfolded through like a myriad of, strategies or whatever. So there was like the direct proxy war fueled by Saddam. Everybody in the region supported it. Iran was alone except for Syria and a little bit of help from North Korea. I think also Libya gave a few missiles, maybe. I have to piece it together. But these were the origin story of the Islamic Republic as a state, right? And how it was sort of arisen out of the Iranian Revolution of 1979 and this kind of like growth to where it is now. I don't think that, especially for me, someone who's lived outside of the country for all my life, that like I have an only like tenuous connection to through individuals and through like texts. And even then it's like pretty surface. I always have to say this, like I'm not an Iran news guy. Like I'm not like a follower. I don't like study, like that I'm like an amateur in this stuff. If only because my kind of focus has been other places, let's say. So in terms of Iranian domestic stuff, I couldn't actually even tell you like the basics. Like I couldn't really tell you. I was like, who? And like I knew one of the guys who got martyred, Shamkhani, I think. I can't even say his name. It's like, oh, I recognize that name because I've never seriously engaged the actual figures, with the exception of a few. Because to me is that like I'm looking at this from like a greater distance, and the actual characters are not so interesting to me because I'm not like my depth in all of this. So anyways, that aside is that like I think in some ways I'm here to like this is such a goofy sports term, but to like do a color man analysis and to situate this, I think, across a broader scope, that you have that since Alexa Flood, October 7th, the launch of it, this daring commando raid, that provoked, in a sense, this insane response from basically the like not just Israel, but the entire West, through whom Israel receives all of its power, right? That it's like this dependent entity on all of the major powers across the world, in various ways. I mean, even including Russia and China, by the way. That their dependencies are open, and yet their ability to evade all kinds of their exceptional status as a country, as a political entity, is just written off. And meanwhile, and this is the perverse thing, and I'll kind of leave, I'm so tired, I'll leave it at this. I'm not going to do my usual rant. I was like just getting started, but now I'm like half putting myself to sleep. But it's something that I'll talk about it, and I just forgot it. Oh, here it is. It's back. This entity and Iran are so intimately linked now. Like we are so intertwined with their shitty fucking history of 70 years of nothing, of unaccomplished nothingness, of like parasitically siphoning off of all of its people, everything from other places, other people, because that's what you do when you're like a manufactured country, which is what they were. Right, which is what they will always be. So the crux there in the purpose of that manufacture, and I'll kind of that the purpose of that manufacture, which is to use as a base of imperial powers to rule over the most energy-rich, geopolitically important chunk of Asia, where this massive country with immense resources, almost 5 decades ago, became independent and broke away from what was and what has remained a regional chokehold, right? There is no more sovereignty left in the region. It's just Iran, Yemen, South Lebanon a little bit, and that's it. So sovereignty in our region is what this is about ultimately. And that's kind of like the wide frame analysis. And unfortunately, we are locked in this thing with this disgusting, racist ethno-state, tip of the spear, psychotic, unhinged, whatever adjectives you can throw at it, probably stick. So it just keeps haunting me, all of this history. And finally, we've come to the point where it's like coming home, as it were, to Iran and to, the crown jewel of the imperialists, in a way. So I don't know if that made any sense. I have very little to contribute to the actual events unfolding other than the Zionists excel and imperialists excel at assassinations, murder, like terrorism, blowing up things, destroying things. These are things states can do to each other because there's no real thing called missile defense. There is a little bit, there is to some degree, but at the end of the day, if you want to kill people from far away, you can make it happen. It's the consequences of doing that keep you from doing that. So it's not the capability, but for some reason, the imperialists decided that the consequences of these actions are now acceptable. So people screaming about like, oh, deterrence, Iran has lost deterrence. Oh, deterrence. It's like, no, bro, you can't deter somebody who wants war. They declare war. That's why. And that's what this was. That finally we're in this phase, this culminating phase. And all my like literary guy brain, I can't even begin to fathom it in terms of like implotment of all this. Because, after this, there's no more independent countries in the region, guys. Like, that's like, let's be clear. Like, I have all faith in the Yemenis, but there is ultimately like, this is like these three countries, like this last stand of the countries is like the Middle East's like culmination. And maybe that's wrong. Maybe like there's a whole moment from here that people just back away. I don't really see that happening, but I'm going to put that out there. That could be one of the thing. Anyways, now I'm really rambling. Okay, I'll stop.
Well, I mean, I think it's definitely the case that a major blow was dealt to the one nation still attempting to maintain its sovereignty that is actually a nation state. Of course, the Yemenis are almost essentially control all of Yemen, but I mean, Iran is really the one country that is a nation state that is fighting to maintain its sovereignty and not to just have a place, within the U.S. imperial hegemony. And there was damage done to that effort by this strike. And I'm wondering if maybe now that it's been a couple of days, there were so many reports right at the outset about how devastating and how many people and all of this. And as I mentioned, that, could have been to some extent part of the exaggerations of psyops. And as we know, the first casualty of war is truth. It all is propaganda, and it's part of, achieving victory is to discourage the opponents by overestimating and exaggerating the damage that's done to quell resistance. But it clearly was a pretty devastating set of attacks that wasn't just missile attacks or planes bombarding, but that there might have been other components and also collaboration from a network of all of these forces that are arrayed around Iran in the region. And so I'm just wondering, Dave, maybe since I know you keep up very closely with all of these events and have been following what's been happening since the reports initially came out, what was the real outcome of, these attacks over the last few days? We know that Natanz, was attacked. There's smoke has been seen. We've seen video of smoke, but then at the same time, the IAEA has affirmed that there isn't any radioactive leaking from the nuclear sites there. So, what seemed at first a devastating blow to this major, well-known nuclear facility is clearly there was damage, but it didn't necessarily force the ceasing of all activity there, or destroy the kind of core and so on. So I'm just wondering, a couple of days on, how would you characterize and assess what took place and how much damage Iran has suffered, partly because we want to know more about its response and what we might be able to anticipate. Because one of the things I was very concerned about on the first day was that perhaps its missile capabilities, forget about the nuclear, that's a civilian nuclear program. That's not actually a military concern in some respects, unless other developments take place. But, in terms of Iran's actual military capabilities, I was most concerned about whether its, missile launching capabilities had been destroyed, or at least damaged and degraded. But also in terms of the command levels of all of these assassinations, how much of an effect was that really going to have? So anyway, what's been your sort of sense of the fallout from it, from the initial Israeli attacks?
Mm-hmm. I would just say to Sina's really excellent point that he made very well about the fact that if someone wants to attack your country with ballistic missiles, with aircraft, with standoff munitions, depending on the amount that they bring, they're going to be able to get through. Furthermore, all of our awareness, I hope no one was surprised that there are active cells from Baluchistan to Tabriz, the various composition that are willing, when called for, to engage in violence against the state. The initial strike actually didn't go any different than I would have predicted, and that is that the Zionists or the Americans would try to attack broad sites from nuclear sites, which they would focus on, and we can talk about Natanz or Bushehr, as a sort of separate subsection, but that also they would attempt to take out aerial defenses, that they would attempt to at least shut the door of known underground missile sites so that they could then continue to pummel them and not allow Iran, if you will, to get its footing. So this was completely anticipated, actually. Like, I'm sort of a military geek for this kind of like detail. And so this was this was completely anticipated. And that they would be able to actually strike the sites. The question was, how much damage would they be able to do, and how would that affect Iran's response time? So I, like you, and probably millions, if not billions of others around the world, spent probably the longest 12 hours of my life, roughly, honestly, like after the news of the initial attacks came in. And I just want to mention, because it's of note, I was live on Press TV talking about the IAEA Board of Governors vote, and the ways that this was probably scripted when the very first announcement of attacks in Tehran came in. And so we immediately shifted to talking about the war and, the implications of that, rather than the IAEA. But so with that, while I was on air with Press TV, I was genuinely expecting them to be announcing and showing the Iranian ballistic missiles leaving their sites and going to Israel, because I had predicted, and I was either wrong or the initial Zionist attack eliminated this capability. But I had always predicted that, especially now in the last 2 months since the threat was made by Trump, since David Yaghoubian bought his ticket to be there, that the IRGC was sitting there on a hair trigger the minute anything was confirmed to have been, kinetically delivered to Iran by Zionists or the United States, that it was on and it was time to push the button. And so the fact that we did not see the skies ablaze with, the contrails of Iranian ballistic missiles, this is what rendered the next 12 hours like probably some of the most you question your life decisions. No, but I was just, a lot of questions. And so now with that, this is the thing. I don't know, considering the pragmatism of Iran, which in many ways echoes and is similar to the pragmatism of Russia, if they ever would have had David Yaghoubian's plan for launching immediately, simply because this is complex, this is dangerous. As Cena had mentioned, and you had mentioned, we're eventually dealing with potentially the specter of a nuclear attack. And so perhaps they were not ready to just hair trigger. We do know that some missiles are liquid fueled, therefore they can't be left, ready to fire in perpetuity. The solid fuel ones can be. So when Iran finally responded after the initial 200 drone, whatever you want to call it, attack ruse. I wasn't sure if those 200 drones that were sent during the day, if you remember, were sent just to tie up Israeli air defenses and planes and American and allied planes. It could have just been that, get away from us for a second while we reconfigure here. But nothing came of that initial 200 so-called claimed Iranian drone strike. But then, of course, True Promise 3 did begin in earnest, if you will. And so in that context, I believe that the announcement of that and the first films of that ended the longest 12 hours of probably much of humanity's existence. And so now more to your question as well, it is very clear at this point that irrespective of the decapitation strikes that Israel carried out, their relative success and as well their initial attacks, that they by no means eliminated Iran's potential to respond with its ballistic missile arsenal of all different types of ballistic missiles, as we have already seen. And so this, I believe, for much of humanity is a great and tremendous relief. And I think anyone probably watching this discussion will also probably have seen the flurry of thousands of not just videos but memes and joyous sort of darshan for the beholding these beautiful projectiles as they come down. And it's really a sick thought, but this is really how, and this relates to what Cena was saying, after decades of threats and bullying and assassinations and murder, my mind fills with the imagery of the years of terrorist attacks at parades, at funerals. It's just so. This was of course joyous to behold, but then it of course leads to the next questions, and that in many ways you've already referenced, and that is or begun to breach, and that is to what extent can Iran sustain this? And I would just say the big question is, to the extent that Iran can sustain this, to what extent can Israel sustain damage before it threatens Iran with a nuclear attack? I hope we can get on to talking about this at some point, and I'll end here by just saying my hope is that this has been long gamed out by the Islamic Republic of Iran, that they already have the components for several nuclear weapons in different rooms that enabled them to claim that they were not putting together a nuclear weapon, but now they have finally been given the order to conjoin the rooms to assemble the device. And it is my hope that we will either hear news of a roughly 5.0 earthquake somewhere in Iran in the next few hours, or just a statement that the Islamic Republic of Iran does not want to have to nuke the apartheid state of Israel, and therefore we should immediately enter into negotiations to make the Middle East a nuclear-free zone. All of the implications being for the world to behold. If Iran, I'm just cutting to the chase here, Adnan, if Iran does not do that, then all of this, and we know what we're talking about, that is the last 45 years of struggle and revolution of Islamic Republic, of support for the axis of resistance. I wouldn't say it will have been for naught, because it set a grand and amazing example that history will record, but it will not have been successful in this round. And that will be, in my view, too tragic to even begin to speak about. Therefore, I think I'm not alone in the hope that Iran has gamed this out far more in far more of a detailed fashion than David Yaghoubian has, and that they are ready to assemble a nuclear device. And I'll just finish by saying this would relate directly to the point that you were making and that I added on with Russia and China. Russia and China do not want Iran to have a nuclear device. But if Iran can be seen to be put in a position where for its survival, it had to do this, and at that point is willing to take wherever the chips fall, snapback sanctions, Russia, China, you want to support those? Do you really? You're next, but you want to? Go ahead. We just saved ourselves and the entire region and arguably humanity by doing this. So if Iran goes ahead and does what I believe much of the world is hoping that it will do, that Iranian political elites have said that they would do, that they have promised us that, I hope that that's a true promise for humanity's sake.
Well, okay, yes, you have definitely gone to the core. One of the only solutions, it seems, is, of course, for Iran to withdraw from the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and take its 60% enrichment of uranium standard up to 90%. And if it hasn't already, I mean, this is the problem, is it's very hard to know what are the capabilities, because this is a regime that has been under the most surveillance, in terms of nuclear, technologies, and, under sanctions, constantly being monitored, subjected to these negotiations with the IAEA. And so, it's hard to know in this context whether, there has been that kind of preparation, because in so many ways, Iran seems to have played a good faith game, and that, of course, has put it in a very difficult geostrategic position when it's dealing with and facing completely unscrupulous, intentions and behavior from the world's most powerful countries, and in particular those of the West. But as you point out as well, China and Russia have adhered to, as nuclear powers, have subsequently been enforcing this regime of preventing this technology insofar as they can from spreading to other countries. And so they have not had the same kind of while they may be allies of various kinds with Iran, this is has been a red line, for them. So, this is a kind of concerning situation, because Iran has played by the rules, has taken negotiations as good faith. It's done very little to depart from, its obligations. Really only under maximum pressure sanctions did it even begin to ratchet up in a very calibrated and slow way, its enrichment of uranium. It didn't immediately, for a period of time, it adhered to those, even though the U.S. had withdrawn and broken its agreements under the JCPOA, Iran for several years continued to adhere to it in the hopes that the rest of the participating countries, France, Germany, Russia, China, etc., would put pressure on the U.S. or, be able to break the sanctions. But the European countries wouldn't do it. They wouldn't change the calculus. And so that's a real kind of concern and a question, because up to this point, all of Iran's foreign policy has been carefully calibrated to try and be demonstrably a good faith actor, and to demonstrate that it is the aggressive intentions of the West, protecting the expansionist apartheid state of Israel and its interests in the region, that are the problem, and not Iran. But that hasn't really worked either. So, it is really a question. Are they in a position to be able to take almost the only alternative that is capable of reversing the strategic situation, which would be, to demonstrate nuclear capability, and then make some further demands to stop the genocide, have a nuclear-free zone, with dismantle the sanctions regime in for nuclear disarmament, right? I mean, this is the one calculus that could change. But it's what we might want to see to change the balance, but it's very hard to figure out whether that's something that's capable, or whether they're still in a phase where they could be prevented from doing so because they have to enrich the uranium, and it takes time. I mean, they had the time. If they'd wanted to, they could have pursued that path earlier, but it's an open question. If they had been pursuing that path and they'd gotten close to 80 or 90% where it could be weaponized, perhaps there would have been this kind of a strike would have happened with U.S. collaboration and complicity anyway. So it's a very difficult situation to figure out what the options for Iran are. And so that's kind of a question that I have for you both. Is like, what can Iran do? What should and must Iran do under these circumstances, given that there are big question marks around whether it is able at this point in time to change the whole strategic balance by announcing that it is nuclear capable? If it can't do that, what else can it do under these circumstances, even to buy time in order to achieve that strategic objective, which it has always said it is not interested in doing? And so, I think that's a big kind of question mark.
If I could just briefly, I want to hear Sina's response, but I just want to just say one thing on the top of that excellent question, is just that I want to just call BS in the context of that question on Scott Ritter's claim that he has been forwarding on the Judge and other shows, that should Iran become a nuclear weapons possessor, that at that point it will be annihilated by the United States and Israel for having nukes. Sorry, we have an example. It's called North Korea. And it still stands. We have another example. It's called Libya, and we have Muammar Gaddafi being sodomized to death by NATO-supported Takfiri terrorists and potentially likely some genuine Libyans caught up in the propaganda. I'm not sure, but the point being, if Iran demonstrates a nuclear capacity, it's game over, at least this round. So I just wanted to say that, because Ritter has been now doubling down on that. That was a conversation from a few months ago. They had the Morandi-Ritter exchange. They kissed and made up, whatever. But now Scott's back at it with this thing about, well, if Iran even demonstrates that it has one, it's just going to be nuked. And I am calling bullshit on that. So, but love to hear what Cena has to say about all these things.
I'm actually overwhelmed by all of this happening. I feel kind of at a loss to, I mean, I kind of discussed earlier about the nature of all of this in sort of like a broad sense, that, there are moments where this is like the Lenin thing, weeks and months or something. No, wait, months and weeks. I can't remember now. Now I don't even remember what the term is, but you get what I mean. I've slept very little. I mean, what do you do with the fact that these things, these like nuclear weapons, like I don't really have an opinion per se. I mean, I do and I don't, but I don't think it's like worth really. It's like, like that if countries feel like how, I don't know, it's more in terms of like, I don't feel comfortable dictating to a country that I don't live in, far away, what they should or shouldn't do, which is not to say that what David just did was like wrong or anything. It's just more for me saying that, again, my position of like where I stand. But I think the larger question that you have to ask is like, how do you like relate to imperialism? And like, that's a simple question that like most people around the world like don't think about. I mean, I'm sure lots of people do, but because they have to like go about their lives and they live in these like national spheres, but we live in this like global US dominated system, as I mentioned, as everybody knows, that like doesn't get named as the hegemon, that it's like dressed up with all these like little adjectives or like names or whatever, but really we're living in the last, 30 years now, this kind of Pax Americana, right? Now we are watching the end of it. Like it's probably already ended. It has ended. And I've said this like on many different shows, is that like these are the violent death throes. And this country like their violent lapdog. I mean, that's more complicated than that. I realize that there's the bigger question that like I'll like put out there because I like said it out loud, but I really didn't mean it that way. But like, what role does Israel play in terms of like the sovereignty of the U.S. as like a main actor? And really, I've just come to the conclusion that it's like one country, two systems, or two systems, one country kind of situation, because yeah, these are like intimately linked entities, like state entities. And on top of that, the US is not a normal state entity. It's the head of a whole network of countries from whom it extracts wealth, resources, and also like all kinds of important sort of like people give US prints money, gives it to people around the world, which means they push a button somewhere and they get all this amazing stuff from around the world. That's the US dollar system. So watching that in decline right now, and watching sort of like US imperial hegemony like as the sole superpower, it's gone. That this is the testing ground of what's going to happen next. And on top of that, this is also like a glimpse into like future wars. I mean, I'm like, obviously this isn't the first shooting war, but like these long distance battles between aerial power and like missile power. I don't even know if that's correct, but obviously like the Israelis don't seem to fire as many missiles, obviously, as the Iranians do. They don't specialize in this kind of like, let's say, telescopic military, like doctrine, so to speak, whereby you can't replicate the conventional power of your nemesis because they're much bigger. They have the U.S., obviously, I'm talking about the U.S., but also this incredibly violent entity that enjoys immense amount of strange, let's say, agency within the U.S. imperial framework, which is like rare. That like it like, and what you can call, although even then, like, what is the nature of like Israeli sovereignty? Like, what is it? What is the nature of the Israeli state? All these things are like big whatever questions. But in the midst of all that, sorry, my dog is making a funny sound and it distracted me. It's like, how do you think about like all of these events together? That like the war, that Alexa flood, the various fronts of this war, how they link together, how they interact with the economic blockade of the West in the Red Sea, but also now what looks like to be an aerial blockade of Israeli airports, right? And so they've been cut off from their lifeline to the West in a way. They're still receiving things. I just saw this report. I mean, who knows if it's true, but they probably obviously are. And like, they still receive weapons. They're still able, they haven't severed that artery, but Israel thrives on its like people being connected to the West, to other countries, and working, and living sort of like, let's say, so to speak, bi-coastal lives, bi-national lives. And that is now impossible. That comfortable flow, circulation of Zionists from mostly the U.S., but also surrounding countries to occupied Palestine, that's kind of over. And so the fun of being a Zionist is over. So they can't stomach that. That's not allowed. They can't exist like that. They can't be besieged. Their entire thing is outside of their country because they're foreign, right? They don't have roots. They don't have a lot of important resources. They don't have energy, right? So they rely upon this. They get their food, a ton of their food imported. So it's like, that is something that you have to think about as what they are. And the general strategy of this war, at least to my sense, seems to be a war of attrition fought across multiple fronts. And the last front, the biggest front, is the front with Iran. And we've now entered it. And yeah, this is history. Dialectic at a standstill. I don't know how to reach for this. All my grad student powers are gone now. I can't theorize my way out of this problem, because like, what do? You look into the abyss. We're looking into the abyss, folks. To put it in podcast speak, we're looking into the abyss, and that'll be the title of this episode. Actually, sorry, my producer brain kicked in. I'm loopy, guys. Am I making any sense here? I feel so loopy. I think I lost my. I think I lost.
No,
Absolutely.
I think that was a very important.
What am I still don't remember what I was talking about before. There's too much happening. I think there is one other thing I will say though, and I always say this, and this is like another moment, is that we are like Westoids to a point where our media consumption is kind of very much like is from the prism of the West. And obviously, we sort of do our best, all of us, in our own ways, to break that sort of info blockade. But the way we speak, the way we frame, the basic lexicon, it's manufactured in the West, and that's who we are. It's okay. So like we have to understand that like we live in this dying world order, and Westernness, whatever that means, has been exposed for what it is. That there's no going back to any of this. It's still funny because they still do the absurd regime change. They still do the human rights stuff. They still do they're still playing that game, but nobody buys it. So yeah, this is a inflection point, whatever. Anyways, I'm back to rambling. Sorry.
No, but I think that we are actually on the cusp of obviously pretty momentous changes potentially in the region, and that because of the fact that open confrontation with Iran was, is really the ultimate dynamic for the region, I think, because Iran is the last nation defending its sovereignty that has capacity in the region to resist in some form the Zionist U.S. Hegemony in the region and the remaking of the region in the image that that imperial hegemon wants, which is of either craven, subordinate kleptocracies that find its place within the hegemony by capturing resources, taking and exploiting the resources of this region to support a tiny elite and make sure that these are not shared with the vast majority of peoples in the region for projects of popular social and economic development, or to sow absolute chaos and war to prevent and impede sovereign development of these countries. I mean, this is the vision that they have, for the region. And Iran is the last sort of line of where that resistance is being confronted. And so something is going to change, in this dynamic, and the future of the region. And I think something you said, David, really for the sake of humanity. I mean, it's something that we've been talking about on this and on other shows about the fundamental and crucial way in which the question of Palestine is something that portends so much more than just the fate of a few million people on a very small strip of land that's been infused with certain kind of religious meaning, and that can often be used to invoke claims, that intensifies the level of conflict and commitment. But that's just really tiny. That's a very narrow way of thinking about what's really at stake. And instead, of course, the fate of the region is at stake. The laboratory for the future of the world is being worked out. And so I think this is a real, what Sina was saying is absolutely true, that we are looking at the abyss, but it raises two questions for me that perhaps we could discuss further. One is, I've already sort of articulated in some sense what I think, the strategy here is, and I want to get your sense as well, is that clearly it has nothing to do with just the idea of preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon. That's just part of a larger set of concerns and problems that go well beyond, a particular issue of nuclear proliferation. It has more perhaps to do with the fact that Iran poses a threat, that its military capabilities with missile technology and other things is always going to be a security threat for Israel as an expansionist, aggressive state. But more fundamentally, the goal is clearly regime change, or to create a Syria or a Libya situation for Iran. I mean, this is the pattern that we've seen for U.S. and Zionist kind of involvement in the region. And so, the scenarios under which that is being plotted and pursued are relevant to really think about. Are they trying to kind of, as something you alluded to, David, are they going to try to recruit ethno-national communities within Iran to resist and destabilize the state? Are they going to try and find ways for popular mobilizations for another try at color revolutions, but this time more like the Syrian case, where you arm sort of terroristic factions to sow chaos and, degrade the regime's capability to control. Are they, these are sort of how are they going to try and pursue this, and what are the sort of possibilities? That's one. The second kind of major topic that I think this raises is also, again, something we've been alluding to, and it came up in our conversation, David, when we were looking at the geopolitical conditions under which Iran's, history and sovereignty have developed since the 19th century. And of course, it was so much about what does it mean to be, as you put it, following from Zbigniew Brzezinski's characterization and formulation of an axis or alliance of grievances, like not a real alliance, but it's actually, shared grievances in being objects of, kind of violent confrontation by the U.S. empire that puts these countries together that don't necessarily have strategic interests beyond that, or other ways of forming longer sustaining alliances. And so I think the real question here is, what are going to be some of the sources, if there is going to be resistance and a future for humanity, as you've put it? We're going to have to see Iran not have to just confront this all alone. What are the possibilities for that? How can we envision that geopolitically? One is, of course, thinking of the other major powers in the system, Russia and China. What are they going to do in this context? What are they willing to do? Are they, one fear that I have is, are they going to turn Iran into, the US's Ukraine? Okay, like this is the other thing. It's like it serves them to prolong this and to sacrifice, in some sense, Iran as a frontline state in which to degrade U.S. power that, as Cena said, is already, fraying and perhaps, outright collapsing. And is this an opportunity to really kind of destroy U.S. hegemony, but make Iran be the, feel the brunt of this kind of historical process? And the second kind of component is possibly, whether there is an ummatic, component. I mean, there are stories about statements that have been questioned, but these statements are circulating, and something worth thinking about, that finally, perhaps there may be, outside of the axis of resistance, some sense of solidarity, not at the level of the people. Of course, the people in Muslim countries around the world, and in fact, the peoples of the world, have felt great sympathy with the plight of the Palestinians, and have supported and expressed solidarity in their resistance, even as their governments betray this popular will and that sense of solidarity. But there have been statements that are reported on, I've seen in the Turkish press, that the Pakistani foreign minister, the defense minister, and even the prime minister have made very powerful statements of solidarity with Iran, outrage at Israel's attack, even to the extent of saying that they're also at the upcoming Organization of Islamic Cooperation. There's going to be a Council of Foreign Ministers meeting held in Istanbul next weekend, on the 21st. Saying that the Ummah, Muslim Ummah has to come together to protect its interests. and articulating that if we don't do something now, in fact, actually, we've seen one by one those countries that have resisted Israel's expansionism, have been targeted and taken down. And at some point, the strategy has to change, because only collectively, through some coordinated form of resistance, will it be possible both to end the genocide and to prevent Iran from being subjected to massive assault and devastating war. So that's a lot. I mean, those are two massive questions.
At the bit, brother,
where we need to go in the conversation.
I just to begin to address that excellent series of questions, and my mind is racing with excitement in terms of answering, because I think this is some really important perspective that I'm going to build on. Sina's really whether or not Sina feels eloquent today. Sina, your commentary on the American empire, what it represents and its scope, I think is the critical background to what I'm going to hopefully just be reminding briefly viewers about in terms of American history and continuity of agenda. And I'm going to try to be relatively brief about this, but let's just go back to 1991, the end of the first Gulf War, the official fall of the Soviet Union, and Paul Wolfowitz in the back room, as documented by Wesley Clark, who went in and visited him and had a conversation with him where he asked Wolfowitz, hey, you feeling pretty good about how we did in the first Gulf War? And I'm summarizing this, but Wolfowitz's response was, hell no, because we only have 10 years to wrap up these regimes before China and Russia get their mojo back. And so, as per Wesley Clark, he says almost verbatim, I was shocked. You mean the military isn't to defend the United States and to put down bad guys, but it's to change regimes? This is, Wesley Clark's statements and speeches in 2006-07 when he was trying to get into the American political game.
So you're saying that was like necessary political naivete. I mean,
yes, indeed.
Come on, man.
Oh yeah, and he's still saying that these Republican neocons, need to go, and that don't blame your Democratic congressmen. So I always have to provide a lot of background for my students when I show them that clip, because they don't understand where Clark's coming from with that, in our sort of post bipartisan reality here now. But so to continue. The United States, since really 1991, but certainly since the neocons took the reins in 2000 with the Bush administration, and received their catalyzing Pearl Harbor style event, which they had predicted / hoped for in the position paper Rebuilding America's Defenses, the PNAC position paper. The United States has been on a tear, so let's just say for the last 24 years at least, trying to create and maintain full spectrum dominance, the Wolfowitz doctrine. That is global hegemony, and that's what the 800 plus military bases that we pay for with our tax dollars go to support. Why am I mentioning this big picture context? We are focused on just one element of American efforts to create global hegemony, and that is in West Asia. But we could talk about this on a global scale, related to Asia, related to Taiwan, related to Ukraine, of course. But let's just focus in on what Adnan was describing as the stakes for and pertaining to the Islamic Republic of Iran and Gaza. I'm going to sort of flash over and cut to another chase, and that is this. From a indigenously produced Yasin 105 dual tandem RPG that can take out a $5 million Merkava tank, to a Ghoul sniper rifle that is indigenously produced, including the 50 caliber rounds for that sniper rifle, which is quite a technical feat, to the Shuaf mine, all the way up to the Khaybar Sheikhan missile that Iran is bragging about unveiling or has already unveiled. What we are seeing here is the indigenous production of armaments that can enable peoples from those living in the concentration camp in Gaza to the Islamic Republic of Iran within its territory to defend themselves. As one front in the war that the United States empire is waging against the world to maintain global hegemony, to create and maintain full spectrum dominance, the specter of people being able to manufacture their own arms and take out tanks. And let's just say, what is General Sisi's military in Egypt if it is facing thousands of Egyptians with Yasin 105s and Shuafs and Ghoul sniper rifles? It is nothing. And so, therefore, the effort for the American empire, for which Israel is its favorite local attack dog. It is its, unsinkable aircraft carrier. Let's not even get into the Christian Zionism and more cultural religious aspects of it. Purely in terms of the maintenance of and extension of American global hegemony, Israel is absolutely key in West Asia, and especially as energy resources of West Asia relate to the broader effort to create and maintain global hegemony. And this then relates to Chinese and Russian power, respectively, as some of the only last remaining strong, independent, sovereign countries that can produce their own armaments. So with that, if the Gazans are going to be successful in freeing themselves from their concentration camp using the armaments that they forge out of the bombs that are dropped on their heads by the Zionists in conjunction with the United States. And if the Islamic Republic of Iran, as the last nation on the list of 7 nations that Wesley Clark revealed to the world, that immediately after September 11th, when he went down to the Pentagon, he had a staffer come up to him and say, "Oh God, sir, this is crazy. We're not just going after Iraq. We're going to take out 7 nations in 5 years. Ending with Iran." Well, it took a lot longer than 5 years, but here we are. If the American empire, supported by its indigenous Zionist attack dog in this context of American global hegemony, is successful in eliminating Iran as a sovereign country which can defend itself, the effort to create and maintain global hegemony, which still has not been manifest, will be much easier. If the Islamic Republic of Iran, using its own indigenous armaments, can defend itself, can hold off the Zionists and the American empire, and demonstrate to the world, as again, from the Gazans with Yasin 105s all the way up to Iran with Khayban Sheikhans, if this example is allowed to persist, to survive, to be successful, the days of the American empire and its Zionist apartheid state are numbered. These are the stakes. This is why, again, I'll go back to what I believe is going to be the necessity, if you will, for Israel and the United States to threaten Iran with nukes, because this is all they have. One more thing I just want to add, because this relates to issues that you raised, Adnan, earlier, and also that what Cena was talking about. In this context, we must understand European actions, reactions, statements, especially over the last 2 months and particularly over the last 72 hours, to be part and parcel of this broader American effort to maintain global hegemony by hook or by crook, continuity of agenda, essentially scripted. And why am I saying that? Because the words and statements of the European political elites are so inane. They are so off base. They are so Orwellian and bizarre. We blame Iran for being out of accordance and for striking Israel. And I mean, it's just absurd. And one has to ask themselves, how could they even be, uttering these absurd statements? And one must consider their role in this broader effort to create and maintain American global hegemony at any cost, to understand how they could, with a straight face, put out such statements. In my view, they don't expect anyone to necessarily believe them. Not even necessarily those that maintain, that keep watching mainstream media. This is just their role, and they're going to do what they need to do, knowing that ultimately it's not going to come down to the rhetoric and the institutions and the complaints and the lodging at the UN. It's going to come down to who has stronger kinetic military power. And I'll just say, I've been kind of known with very close friends of mine over the last few years for saying this, basically, yeah, I ain't reading that. Build more Shahab missiles. I was stuck on Shahabs, right? But just build more Shahab missiles. Shahab missiles, that's what's going to decide this. Not the United Nations, not the G3, not the E3, not the P5+1, not a benevolent American president who's going to be elected to bring about hope and change, or change and hope, or no, it's going to be Iran's ability to defend itself against this murderous, sociopathic, Zio-American global empire. That is what is necessary. I'm sure I'm not alone. I mean, I've even just like secretly hoped, my God, would they just ask me what they need so I can tell them and they can be safe? You need to build more missiles and you need to build nukes now. Otherwise, this is all for naught. I've also said, because I've referenced a few of these things online, and I've said, look, I'm sorry, I'm not a religious person. I'm a heathen, so I don't have the same restraints that Sayyid Ayatollah Khamenei has. I'm just David Yaghoubian from Sherman Oaks, California, and I think Iran should build nukes like yesterday. So forget the moralizing and the concern about anything other than self-preservation in the face of the ZioAmerican imperial onslaught. So again, just to recap the last point that I was making, I don't think anyone should be surprised about what Europeans have been saying, these lapdog vassals of the American empire, who, if you've just looked at their rhetoric through the Ukraine war, I mean, this is what we're seeing related to Iran. So don't be surprised. They're playing their role as was designed, as was carved out for them. Furthermore, last thing, we are literally reading from a script right now. In 2009, the Brookings Institution put out their policy paper / regime change script, Which Path to Persia? Chapter 5 of Which Path to Persia is titled Leave It to Bibi. Chapter 5, Leave It to Bibi, describes how, after dragging Iran through a specious, spurious process of negotiating the nuclear issue, ultimately Iran will be deemed to be a bad actor. All of the allies of the American empire will, as per my point, go to mainstream media and say Iran is a bad actor. Israel will start the kinetic exchange, at which point the United States will just be dragged into yet another war. Just how could we have seen this coming? This has all been scripted, folks. We're reading from a script. I want to give it up for Brian Berletic, who is essentially almost alone. Perhaps the Zed Squirrel from X are really the only two commentators who I've seen just drilling this point for the last 2 months. Like, don't believe this. This is all just part of the propaganda. Build the Shahab missiles and the nuclear defense yesterday. So that there has been in the sort of blogosphere, commentosphere, talking headosphere, some rational heads, in my view, and they have been essentially parroting, my sort of bad joke, which is, I ain't reading all that, build the Shahabs. I think that applies to our projection of where things might go in the next few days. I'll just say again, if Iran does not unveil its nuclear capacity, it will be threatened by the apartheid state of Israel with nuclear annihilation and or by nuclear annihilation by the American empire.
Wow. Let's hope. if those are the choices, we definitely are staring.
One more thing, Adnan, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt. I'm just going to say, this is why humanity is sort of contingent on, if you will, the survival of the Islamic Republic of Iran. If we want the future of humanity to be George Orwell's vision of a boot stomping on a human face forever, Iran loses this round and the Palestinians lose this round. And Donald Trump gets to build, statues of golden calves in Gaza. And the Islamic Republic of Iran will be run by a bunch of Pahlavi sellouts and be used as a bulwark against Russia and China. And so it'll be up to the next generation, our children and our children's children, to be having these conversations and to stand up and to take up arms against the evil empire. So it either happens now or it happens in a generation. And Iran is standing up for humanity now, those of us living now, on Earth now. And so that is why this matters now.
I really hope that Russia and China understand this, because that, I think, is a key in terms of the realpolitik, the material conditions. They are among the only powers that can change the strategic calculus here. If they stay on the sidelines, then it is just Iran, as you're saying, facing the full frontal assault of the Zio-imperial hegemonic project. And that's a big ask. That is a big ask. I mean, we've seen the heroism of the people of Gaza, the people of Palestine, resisting for 20 months. But if the United States gets directly involved, of course, it's completely involved. It's completely implicated in all of this, as are so many of the other regimes in in the region, we saw that Jordan once again was involved with, shooting down Iranian drones launched in response to Israel's attack. This may not have been so technically possible if there hadn't been the overthrow of the Assad regime in Syria. We saw indications of evidence of refueling taking place over Syrian territory, and it's evident and obvious that instructions were given to some of these affiliated groups not to fire upon these planes that were coming into Syrian airspace, and that this had been approved by the current regime of Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, and so there's a lot that had to go in to get us to this point where it was possible for this attack on Iran, and now Iran is facing the fact that it is so far standing entirely alone. So I really take to heart what you just said, David, and I really hope, as I have mentioned, that we really are I am looking to see how Russia and China are going to deal with this, because to me, that's going to be absolutely crucial for the success of Iran to weather this storm and to be a bulwark against the kind of vision of the future that we've been fearing and articulating as, genuinely what's at stake. I mean, I don't have as much hope for Muslim solidarity as expressed in these nation states. These governments have proven to be co-optable, craven, and that's been a source of, great consternation to the 1.5 billion to 2 billion, Muslims around the world who are so disappointed that their own governments seem to do nothing. I mean, all of the countries that have maintained diplomatic relations and normalized in recognizing Israel have neglected to remove their ambassadors or to cut off relations. I mean, these are small steps that might be meaningful. These are not, that costly. Well, perhaps they are. That's the whole point, is that they see that any move, even mild, you can of course condemn Israel's actions, but if you take any even minor concrete steps to withdraw support in various ways and to put pressure on Israel, that it can be very dangerous for you. So this is the situation that we have, where Iran is facing this essentially alone.
I did just, by the way, just got it's on Telegram, and of course, we don't know the rest of these things, but that Mohsen Rezai, who, if this is actually true, is stated that during the past few days, all Arab countries contacted us and expressed their support for us. And Pakistan said, quote, "If Israel uses nuclear weapons, we will also strike it with nuclear weapons." So this is just another potential wild card, is if North Korea and or Pakistan step up and basically just say, if Israel and the United States use nukes against Iran, we will use nukes against them. That might also provide Iran with the ability to sustain itself through this imperial onslaught.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of hope that we might have, that there would be some South-South solidarities to extend, some kind of protection under a nuclear umbrella that would allow Iran the space not only to survive during this period, but perhaps also develop its own capabilities and capacities to ensure survival. Sina, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the state of those two kinds of key issues, both about the possible consequences and directions geopolitically that things might take. Where might we see some, possibility for resistance out of the abyss? but also about the kind of strategic goals and what they're attempting to do and how they're planning on doing it. To try and destabilize Iran to achieve regime change. I think we're all agreed that it really is about regime change in Iran. But I mean, maybe there are additional kinds of concerns and questions about how this is going to be prosecuted and what Iran can do, in resisting it.
I do have something bad to report. Breaking news: United States aircraft carrier USS Nimitz and accompanying carrier strike group currently en route to the Middle East. So it seems like the parties are lining up for some kind of great confrontation, unless this is some kind of brinksmanship. But it's not looking good, folks. I'm going to try to get this episode out soon. I don't know how to conclude. I don't really have anything to offer. Nothing coherent. Yeah. For once in my life, I'm at a loss for words. Once in my life. You're muted. You're muted, Afghan. I said Afghan, Adnan. Sorry, Afghan. Adnan, you're muted.
That is an indication of what we're facing here is that even Cena is somewhat overwhelmed because at this point we can understand, I think, how and appreciate really how momentous this could be, because what we've been witnessing up to this point are initial stages of this kind of a confrontation that were taking place. Now things are very direct and very open, and these are the kinds of conditions and situations under which history's dialectic really moves. So there are definitely going to be changes in the region. We knew that. We understood that after October 7th. If you gamed out, if you played it out, but there were a lot of other steps along the way. If things had happened, if the Palestinians had not, in Gaza in particular, been able to resist as they have, we wouldn't be quite at the point where we are now. It has forced, in some sense, the hand of Israel and the U.S. To take certain measures. Unfortunately, however, some of those measures have been successful in realigning much of the Middle East. I mean, the fall of Syria, to me, absolutely momentous shift and change in the regional dynamics. And to me, it's still totally astonishing how there can be so many people who are avowedly pro-Palestinian and don't understand that the loss of Syria, more than the loss of Syria, the turning of Syria into a state that fits within the U.S. imperial hegemony as a collaborationist state now with Zionism that has accepted the loss of its territory and is now willing to allow overflight without any resistance. It just enables so many more strategic options. I mean, let's think about it. Israel is a tiny country. I mean, it is an artificial construct, as Sina was saying. It's fake countries had to draw all of these resources as a recent settler colonial state, all these resources from elsewhere. But what's its strategic depth? It is only because it is absolutely maximally supported not only by the United States, but by this entire Western alliance that is ready to collaborate, ready to destroy its own institutions, to reveal its utter and complete hypocrisy. The IAEA, making a statement just hours before this Israeli attack to declare Iran as non-compliant and aggressive, and basically provide the cover for the ridiculous statements made by the French, the Germans, the British, to blame Iran as if Iran was the aggressor, and to characterize this Israeli attack as legitimate self-defense and a preemptive strike. I mean, this is bizarro world stuff that is the only way that Israel is managing to survive and support itself, to be this kind of power in the region. And so there's so many components that have to go into enabling this tiny country to wreak such havoc in the region compared to the strategic depth of Iran. You know, we had a wonderful conversation. I encourage listeners to go back and talk about the 19th century forward of Iran's geopolitical positioning. But at the outset of that episode, I said, you know, let's also remember that Iran has like 2,000, 3,000 years of history as a major state, as a major power. I mean, it has strategic depth and history. This is a major country. And that's exactly why it's seen as a rival, because it can be a source of independent, sovereign development in the region. If Iran, can exert its resistance to U.S. and Zionist hegemony, there is a chance for the region to actually cooperate, develop, and be an independent, sovereign region that may actually contribute to the well-being of the vast majority of its people. That's really what's at stake. So I don't know, Dave, if you have any other conclusions. You sort of left us on a pretty powerful note in your last comment. I don't know what one could say in addition to that.
It's so interesting. This is like kind of, I don't know if meta would be the right word for this right now, but in light of Sina's, feelings, contributions, and position today, and your statements and interpretation, on top of what I just said, this just in, Cena announced the announcement of the American aircraft carrier. Commander Mohsen Rezai, quote, "We have managed the war so far and proceeded on a logical path, but it is possible that we may reach results that push us to cross boundaries and take certain measures. Currently, we will not manufacture a nuclear bomb, but we do not know what will happen in the future." So we're here, real time. Like the United States is, as per the script, sending its aircraft carriers. I could joke and just say that's probably the sign that there's not going to be a war, because those are floating coffins, but that's another discussion to have. For the American public, that's what you need. You need to bust out the aircraft carriers, even though they might not be relevant or effective in an attack on Iran. And Iran is at least responding in the information space, I think, to let people know that the leadership is aware that everyone is wondering when they are going to do this and hoping that they are going to do this. And so I think, again, this kind of statement is the way that Iran can project itself as still keeping with the NPT, still, as you described, Adnan, wanting to be the good player who is sticking with international law till the very, very end. Like, don't make us do this, please. But we had to. Shit, I guess we had to. So I think these issues, the extent to which the United States is not just on board and part and parcel of, but is directly driving the ins and outs of this entire exchange relative to what Iran is prepared to do in the context of its sort of legal, legitimate commitments and stance, and potentially what it will do and must do to save itself. I would say those who are interested in maintaining some framework of what we could call international law and an international community. Because if this is allowed to transpire, if the ZioAmerican onslaught against Gaza, from Gaza to Iran, is enabled to be successful, the precedent that this will set, I mean, we would have to have a whole entire other show to talk about the precedents that have been set, or that the former precedents and understanding and traditions that have been completely eradicated and eliminated by American and Israeli actions and statements and lies over the past 2 months. It's shocking. So the hope that there will be ever an alternative to the rules-based international order, which would be actually the implementation of international law, completely revolves around the ability for the Islamic Republic of Iran to survive this. Again, if it doesn't, just picture a boot stomping on a human face forever, because at least as far as this generation is concerned, that's what we're going to get to experience and witness.
Well, history is in the
Adnan,
balance.
you're muted.
As both our guests have been saying, I hope people have found the discussion and the analysis more than interesting, but insightful and vital for us to really grapple with. There may be things we can do. We should be mobilizing. Where is the anti-war movement? This is a question. Unfortunately, I think in many ways we've seen the pattern of the pro-Palestine solidarity movement getting derailed when it comes to U.S. and Israel confrontation with Iran, because for some reason it seems so much easier for even those people of conscience who recognize the aggressive, genocidal approach of Israel and the United States in the region to somehow feel that there are worthy and unworthy victims, even as they complain about the way in which Palestinians in the mainstream press are not characterized and understood as worthy victims against which they are expressing, their solidarity of the humanity of Palestinians, that for some reason, when it comes to state-to-state conflict in the Middle East, they lose some of that kind of integrity and that sympathy and that focus. And I think, in fact, actually, given what was happening immediately prior, where some statements were being made that suggested that members of the Western Alliance were reconsidering the level of support they should be giving to the apartheid state of Israel, with the specter of a total siege causing extreme famine among the Palestinians, and the disgusting and horrifying spectacle of the new aid regime. And I do want to ask listeners to go listen to my conversation with Abdul Jawad Omar that is just out today. It should be out by the time this video comes out. Very recently on his two articles talking about the Gaza gangs and the new aid regime that is being imposed upon Gaza, that despite the attempt by Israel to allow some aid in so that it would be immune and continue to have total impunity, that hasn't worked. It's so outraged the conscience that there has been some pressure before this attack on Iran, that in some ways we've seen that pattern before, where Israel has exploited conflict with Iran as a way to also take attention away from its genocide in Gaza and to change the dynamic of the discussion. That's not the reason why they attacked Iran, obviously, but it is, I think, one of the many unfortunate outcomes of their aggressive assault upon Iran is that it has meant that there is less focus on what's happening in Gaza. And so we're going to be watching all of this. We're going to be very concerned about what's happening in the coming days. And I hope that both David and Cena will come back as we update ourselves on this very fateful moment in history. So until next time, but David, first, maybe you can tell listeners where they can follow your work. You're on Press TV pretty regularly, and where people can find more of your work and your social media presence.
Actually, I'll just say it's probably why I still have a job and why you can still see me on Press TV. I never got on social media, and so I don't have one. I'll see you on Press TV, or Google my books if you're interested in the development of Iranian nationalism. But yeah,
excellent. Well, so watch Press TV if you want to see more of David.
Press TV does, pardon me, just they do post all my stuff to X, and if you just do David Yaghoubian search, like years of commentary come up. But I have a Twitter account, but I don't use it. I just established it so people can't tweet like things in my name. So that's, anyway, just to clarify. Some of the best shows out there, and especially the Tanky Therapy, has sustained myself, family members, and I think probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of people around the world. So give it up for yourself, man. Like, you guys have carried some like really heavy weight and powerful spirit for so many of us. And I mean, really, I'll get verklempt.
I'm so glad that you mentioned Tanky Therapy, because I actually also want to plug a new format for this show, which will be a live stream panel discussion with, many of the cast of characters perhaps who have been on Tanky Group Therapy and other related shows and projects, as well as perhaps some new people. But the idea behind this one will be live, as I said, but also not designed to make you feel better. They're going to be called struggle sessions, because we need to struggle with where is our movement, with some self-criticism, and get going on some action. So we're going to be having some of those coming up very soon. And hopefully the first one will be Sunday, June 22nd. More information, you can follow the show and me on Twitter at Adnan A. Hussein. And of course, if you're watching this, you know about the YouTube show, but it's available on podcast, audio podcast as well. And if you're interested, you can always be a supporter and help us keep producing this kind of content and start developing new formats and new ideas, like we're trying to do with the struggle sessions that will be regularly panels live streamed, hoping to build some community. And your questions are welcome. If you're a patron, hit me up on patreon.com/Adnan Hussein, and you can send in your questions and we'll have the panel deal with them. I think it'll be a great resource in addition to Tanky Group Therapy, which, as Dave says, has helped a lot of people through it to survive, to cope. But I think we're going to need to do more than cope now. We're going to have to get going on action and self-criticism